Good evening, everybody. We're a little bit ahead of time, so hopefully you're getting set in, but we've got quite a number of people attending this evening, which is great. And I suspect that's because we've got a very high-profile speaker in Janet Hughes, who many of you will know is the Programme Director of the Future Farming and Countryside Programme at DEFRA. And on the back of last week's various announcements, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Janet to come and answer whatever questions we've got. Just a little bit ahead of when we start on a bit of admin, just so you know, the webinar is being recorded as usual and is available on our YouTube channel or via our website afterwards. So please make use of that if you want to recap anything or you miss anything during the evening. The other thing is, obviously, we've got the usual opportunity to ask questions. If you could put those in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, we'll try and pick those up. I can't guarantee at all that all of your questions will be asked, but we will endeavour to get round to as many of them as we can. But Janet has kindly agreed to answer those after the seminar if we don't get round to them. So hopefully we'll get some opportunity, or you will get an answer to your questions as we go. As always, as I say, it's been recorded, but as always, the webinar is sponsored by Barclays. We're very grateful to Barclays, who have sponsored all our webinars last year and are agreeing to do so this year. They're big supporters of ours, and we're very grateful for their sponsorship for this programme. And we hope you're still finding this a useful way to keep up to date on various events. As many of you will know, we've got others coming up through the winter after Christmas, January, February and March, which we'll mention at the end. So I think without further ado, we'll perhaps make a bit of a start. It's just gone 7. My timekeeping is pretty poor, so I'm quite pleased to be starting on time. So first of all, as I say, just to remind everybody or anybody that has only just joined, the webinar, as always, is recorded and it's been sponsored by Barclays, so we're very grateful for that. The topic for this evening's webinar is the Future Farm Policy that was really as part of the Agricultural Transition Programme heading towards ELMS and the kind of new world that we're all going to be living in, or we perhaps already are living in. So we're really pleased to welcome Janet Hughes, who's the Programme Director for DEFRA's Future Farming and Countryside Programme. She's been the Programme Director since June 2020, and she heads up the team that's responsible for transforming the way we support and regulate farming and the countryside in England. Over the next 7 years, the programme will be closing down existing schemes, as we know, we already know what's happening with BPS and rules, and replacing them with the environmental land management, grant support, innovation, R&D support, and a new approach to regulation and enforcement. And Janet's job is to make sure the programme delivers all this successfully and in a way that works for farmers and achieves the intended outcomes. So as you can imagine, Janet's fairly busy at the moment, I would imagine. So we are extremely grateful for her to come along this evening and to update us on where things are. We're also joined by Lynette Steel, our Farm Policy Adviser. Again, many of you will know Lynette. She joined the TFA in 2018, and she farms in her own right alongside her husband on a tenanted arable holding in Hampshire, where she plays an integral part in running the business. So she has a good spin on both the practical implications and the policy implications. So we will hear a little bit from Lynette on the TFA kind of position on where we are with things. The kind of outlook for this evening is that I will just give a very short setting of the scene and an overview of where we think we are from a TFA perspective. Lynette, as I said, will give a more detailed position on where we are with the update. Janet will share her views on where we are and on the announcements that were made last week. But we want to give quite a chunk of the evening over to your questions. We've got quite a few been sent in prior to the event, so please sharpen your pencils. Well, pencils are not really your keyboard skills, maybe. Put them in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So just very quickly to sort of set the scene, and I don't think I'm telling anything to anybody that we don't already know. But obviously we are in times of significant change now. We've left the European Union. BPS is reducing. Many of us have been lucky enough, or maybe not lucky enough, 97.6%, I think, of farmers were lucky enough, if lucky is the right word, to receive their BPS payment on the 1st of December, I believe. So our BPS is going down. We know that it's reduced from what it was last year, and it will continue to reduce. So we have to start big businesses around what the new environment is, and we know that I think we know the direction of travel on this. The Environmental Land Management Scheme will start paying us for doing certain activities which are broadly speaking around the public money for public goods phrase, which I think was introduced to us all by Michael Gove, but I might be wrong about that, so I don't want to attribute it if it wasn't him, but it seems like it was. And I think in many ways that's a good thing. I think that we are generally very good as farmers, and perhaps particularly as tenant farmers, in using our entrepreneurial skills to react to market conditions. And if the market condition is such that we are going to get paid a sum of money to deliver whether that be environmental or access or heritage or whatever it should be, if we consider that reward is worth our time and effort, then we're usually quite good at doing that, I think. So in contrast to BPS, where regardless of how efficient or how good you were or how entrepreneurial you were, simply occupying a piece of land gave you a return, this is a very different environment. So I'm not sure it's all bad news, and I think we should embrace that to a degree. What we do need to know, obviously, though, is the detail of how this is going to be delivered. And I think we started to get shed a little bit of light on that detail last week. And again, I think whilst we may all be a bit grumbly about that it's a bit late in the day or there's not enough detail or one thing and another, I think we should absolutely welcome that this is the start of what will be quite a lengthy programme of change, and we should embrace it. I think there's nothing more important, or perhaps more important for us as farming businesses, that if we want to continue to receive public money to support our efforts for doing things, we need to embrace it and we need to take that on board. So I think it's a step in the right direction. It's the start of what I suspect will be quite a long journey, and no doubt Janet will enlighten us on just how long that journey is going to be a little bit in the next few minutes. But I think as farmers and farming businesses, we do have to embrace it, and wherever we can, try and get involved with what the direction of travel is. So that's a very sort of general view, I think, of where we are. I think finally, and Lynette might highlight this, I think, in a moment, I think we should also welcome that George and the team at head office and myself, to a much lesser degree, have spent quite a lot of time engaging and lobbying with DEFRA and the teams. And it is good to see that certainly with the SFI 22, certainly some of the things that we were very keen to press have been listened to and embraced. I'm thinking particularly of access to schemes. So that's to be really welcome, and we'll continue to beat Janet's ears around and all her team's ears around getting the right thing for tenant farmers. So we won't expect to get everything right, but it's a really welcome to see that has happened. So we'll just pass over to Janet. As I said, I've done Janet's introduction. Many of you will probably know her or certainly come across her. So Janet's going to give us a little bit of a brief update about the announcements last week and where she thinks things are. Thank you very much, Janet.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks a lot for having me here this evening. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. And I'm really grateful for the input that Tenant Farmers Association has had into getting us to this point. As you say, we don't get everything right all the time, and we don't claim to get everything right all the time, but we do think we're getting better and better. So it's really heartening to hear that you can see that we've been listening, because we certainly have. So yeah, as Mark says, I'm the director of the programme in DEFRA that's responsible for everything we're doing to move away from the Common Agricultural Policy onto a new set of arrangements for England. So just so you know what to ask me questions about, I'm responsible for the programme that's phasing out basic payments, looking after our existing environmental schemes, countryside stewardship and environmental stewardship, and improving them. And we are seeing those improve, and we're seeing more people coming into them. We had a 40% increase in applications just in the last year for CS. And then we're going to phase those schemes out, as you know, and we're going to introduce 3 new environmental land management schemes. The first one, Sustainable Farming Incentive. I've posted a link in the chat to some information we published about that last week. And that is for farmers, and it's for any farmer anywhere to be able to do things alongside food production, which will also produce goods for the environment or climate or animal welfare. And so the idea is that alongside your food production, you also take better care of your soil, perhaps, or in time we'll be introducing other things that will pay you for, such as looking after your hedgerows, using integrated pest management, using nutrient management approaches to reduce your inorganic fertilizer use, and various other things which we can get into if you like. So that's the farm level scheme. Then the next scheme is the local nature recovery scheme. That's also going to be primarily most of the money spent through farmers, because farmers are 70% of the landscape. And what we want to do through that scheme is to fund people to create space for nature on their farm. Maybe the less productive areas will be given over to habitats, trees, ponds, what have you, in order to support biodiversity, water quality, air quality, flood risk mitigation and other outcomes. And the idea is that you farmers choose what's the right rate, what's the right combination of things that you want to do. Maybe you want to take a more regenerative, nature-friendly approach to farming as a whole, and you want to look at integrated pest management, soil management, those sorts of things through the Sustainable Farming Incentive. Maybe as well as that, or instead of that, you just want to spare the less productive areas of your land, as many farmers do now through countryside stewardship, and you'll be able to have a combination of those things through those 2 schemes. And then the third scheme, landscape recovery, is for landscape scale, long-term, more radical habitat restoration or land use change. So things like afforestation, peatland restoration, wetland restoration, ecosystem restoration, and that's for larger scale, longer term projects. And we want tenant farmers to play a role in all of these schemes, and we want to make sure that they're accessible to you, relevant to you, attractive to you. And I'll come on to how we've done that in SFI shortly. The other things I'm responsible for are the productivity schemes that we put in place. So we just recently launched the first round of the new Farming Investment Fund. And although not all tenant farmers are small, some are. And one of the things that we did was reduce the lower limit of the amount of grant you could get through that scheme to make it more accessible to those who are smaller farms. And we also made it accessible to contractors as well as tenants and other types of farmers. We'll be launching another round of that in the next few weeks. And we also are running various innovation type schemes to support innovation on farm and to help farmers adopt more innovative practices. And then the final aspect to this is regulation and enforcement, where we know that regulation is currently seen as disproportionate, punitive, unfair, but also not very effective where it really matters. And what we want to do is flip that so that the regulatory regime is trusted and valued by people, because it's fair and proportionate for the vast majority of people who are trying to do the right thing and take care of the environment as they farm and prevent damage, but properly enforces the rules where people are willfully discharging slurry into rivers in contravention of the rules, for example. So taking all those things together, what are we trying to achieve? Well, what we're trying to achieve is we want to support food production, obviously, to continue. That's the most important thing that you do in farming, food and other produce. But alongside that, we want to see better outcomes for the environment and climate and animal welfare. So we believe those things go hand in hand, because you can't be green if you're in the red, obviously. So in order to be able to do good things for the environment, you need to have a sustainable business. But also in the long term, we think businesses can be more resilient if they have a diversified stream of income, including environmental goods alongside their food produce. And obviously, if we look after the environment, that's good in the long term for farming. So that's what we're trying to achieve. Things that we've done recently, we've launched the Farming Investment Fund, as I mentioned. We just last week published some information about how the Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme will work. And in that scheme, we've taken steps to make it much more accessible to tenant farmers than current schemes. So whereas in countryside stewardship, you have to enter into an agreement for 5 years, and if you leave early, you pay a penalty. So that makes it not accessible to lots of farmers who have a shorter term let than that. And there's no flexibility, very little flexibility to change what you're doing. In the Sustainable Farming Incentive, you'll have a 3-year agreement. And actually, if you've only got 2 years left on your tenancy, you can still come into and have a 2-year agreement in the first year. And there'll be flexibility to add things, add land, add levels of ambition, add more standards, add more actions each year as you go through. So shorter agreements, more flexibility to make it work for tenants. And you won't need landlord consent to take part in SFI because we believe that's taken care of already. And that's an extra bit of bureaucracy you don't need in order to come into the scheme. Things that are coming, we've got another round of the Farming Investment Fund coming, the added value round, that will be coming in the next few weeks. We'll be publishing some information in the new year. And when I say the new year, I don't mean the civil service new year as in any time up to December, I mean in January, about local nature recovery and landscape recovery, those two are the schemes that I mentioned. And we'll be launching the first wave of the projects for landscape recovery in the new year. We'll be publishing some information about our lump sum exit scheme very shortly. I can't confirm the date because the way this works is that I don't have control over the date. I have to wait for somebody to say, I don't have any slides for someone who's saying they can't see my slides. I'm not doing slides, I'm just saying things. So that's why you can't see them. The lump sum exit scheme, we'll publish the details very shortly about that. I can't tell you the date yet because it's not in my hands to confirm it, but as soon as we can confirm it, we will, and it'll be very soon. And that's the scheme for those who want to leave the sector. To be clear, we're not trying to encourage people to leave the sector, but we know there are some farmers. I spoke to one who was telling me that he's in an AHA tenancy. He doesn't have anyone to hand it on to. He's 70 years old. He wants to get out of farming. He can't afford it. And actually this lump sum is what's going to make the difference for him in being able to retire from farming. That's who that scheme's for. And we'll publish details of that shortly. There'll be more information to come in the new year as well about our approach to regulation and enforcement and the work we're doing there. Our new entrance support scheme to help new entrants come into the sector, and the further elements of the animal health and welfare pathway, which is the pathway to a range of interventions to try and support improved animal health and welfare in the sector. I've mentioned what we're doing on tenants. The other issue on tenants is making sure that it's the person doing the farming and producing the goods that gets paid. So you have to, in order to enter into the scheme, you have to show that you're the one with the management control to do the actions. And that will normally be what used to be known as the active farmer. And so that's the other aspect of our scheme design that we're doing to make sure that it works for tenants. The final thing I wanted to say is about how we're working. We're taking a test and learn approach, and I'm conscious that that can look messy, but it looks a lot less messy than taking a big bang approach where the likelihood is the whole thing will fail, as has happened in the past. So what we're doing is we launch, in this case of Sustainable Farming Incentive, for example, we've launched the first few elements of the scheme. We'll see how that goes, and then we'll add in more elements incrementally as we go. In the same way that you wouldn't change your farming system dramatically overnight, you might do a bit of testing first to see how it goes and then build up from there. That's what we're going to do with these schemes. And we're very serious about engaging with farmers and learning about what works and how we can make this whole set of reforms work, because if they don't work for farmers, we don't get any of the outcomes that we want to see. We don't get sustainable food production, and we don't get a profitable sector, and we don't get the environmental outcomes. So making everything I've just described really work for all farmers is absolutely at the heart of our mission here, and that's why I'm here tonight. And I like to spend as much of my time as I can talking directly to farmers. So if you're not involved or you'd like to get involved, feel free to drop me an email and I'll point you in the right direction. I will put my email address in the chat, and you're more than welcome to get in touch if you want to get involved, and I will point you in the right direction. Thank you very much, Mark. Back over to you, I think.
Brilliant, Janet. Thanks very much for that very succinct run through of what is actually quite a lot of stuff going on, and that's really useful. And you've answered one or two of the questions that I think we've had before, but we might just pick them up anyway. So I think we'll just move straight over to Lynette, who's going to just give us a short sort of view of the TFA response to what we've heard, particularly last week from DEFRA. So over to you, Lynette.
Thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, that was a great update by Janet, and I'm hoping everybody on the webinar has had a chance to look at the document that was published last week. From a TFA perspective, we are really encouraged to see some tangible detail announced by DEFRA on SFI 2022. These details are really the first details that really should help farmers decide ahead of the application window opening for SFI 2022 next year, whether the scheme is feasible for their own businesses. Changes to scheme rules in flexibility, agreement length, compliance and regulation and eligibility are welcomed, really welcomed. And these go some way to appease the requirements of the tenanted sector. Well, for now anyway, we're working on it. So it is important to remember, as Janet has said, that SFI will be built up over a 4-year period. Consideration should be given to how the 2022 offering can be knitted into other government funded schemes during the transition period to bolster your farm incomes and prepare your businesses for the eventual removal of BPS in 2027. We obviously hoped that we would have seen a wider range of scheme information coming forward under the latest winter announcement, including the revised countryside stewardship payment rates. However, we appreciate that there have been a number of hold-ups at Janet's, not just Janet's end, but at that end of things. And like I say, we appreciate the detail that we have in front of us now for next year's scheme. For the Tenant Farmers Association, where does that leave us now? I think it's really important for us to tell you what we're focusing on. And obviously, if there's anything that we're missing, I really want to hear from members. But our work now focuses on continuing to engage with Janet and her team to ensure accessibility for tenants and those who do not own the farm, the land they farm, in all parts of the agricultural transition plan. For us, this means ensuring local nature recovery and landscape recovery, that's parts 2 and 3 of ELMS, do not solely focus their attention on actions which only landowners can achieve. There's also much work to do with the moorland and rough grazing standard development to ensure that that's workable in group agreement settings, as well as continuing to advise on the development of the additional standards which are being brought forward under SFI over the next 3 years. Operationally, and I think this is something that gets missed in the press coverage, we need to make sure this scheme works operationally. We've all been there where countryside stewardship has been quite a clunky system. So we'll continue to work with the RPA as a key stakeholder to ensure current and new schemes are robustly tested prior to their launch. And just for example, one thing that springs to mind is how do rotational options under countryside stewardship work with SFI soil standards? It is going to take some getting our heads around this new policy landscape, one that is optional and dependent on your individual business goals. As well as the new compliance and monitoring regime and the removal of prescriptive nature of scheme requirements, it's going to take some time culturally for us to understand that DEFRA are putting some responsibility back on us to carry out these standards that we sign up to, rather than being as prescriptive as they have been in the past. Really echoing Mark's words at the beginning, I urge members to take time to fully digest the announcement last week and SFI 2022 before discounting yours and your business's involvement. We have a long road ahead of us, as Mark said, and this is really the starting blocks for us all to engage in this new policy landscape. So that's just our view from the TFA, but as always, very happy to take any of your questions or to chat to anybody after the webinar if they have any major concerns.
Brilliant, thanks Lynette. Janet, I don't know if you had any comment about what Lynette has said, or wanted to just cover anything off there before we go into Q&A?
I'm happy to go straight into Q&A. All I'd say is, I mean, I agree with an awful lot of what Lynette said. There is more work to do on the moorland standard. We've published it in draft. We've got more work to do on the other schemes. We know that. We've got a lot more things to publish, and we've got a lot more detail to put out there about all of the schemes. We know that too. So I think this is, we're in a sort of, we all know what the work is in front of us. We just need to work through it together now and make sure that we do it right and do it well and keep learning and improving as we go. I think that, rather than going through every point, I think that's probably the most useful response, really.
Okay, thanks, Janet. Well, we'll just kick off straight into Q&A. We've got a few coming through, and I'll try and sort of corral them around various subjects rather than just try and repeat too much. So I think perhaps one of the starting points here, Janet, and maybe this sort of goes back to my comment right at the start about us as tenants having to be quite entrepreneurial, and we don't have a wad of land to sell off when things are tough. We have to make money to pay the rent. So I just want, there's a couple of sort of comments around this. One that we had that was sent in earlier just asked if the uptake of environmental schemes is low, will DEFRA blame farmers as not caring for the environment, or will they realise that the incentives are just too low and not worth the hassle and revise the rewards upwards? And perhaps I could add to that, would the Treasury also say, well, the farmers clearly don't want the money, so we'll have this back?
So we're not in the business of blaming farmers at all. We know that there's lots of farmers who are already doing plenty of things for the environment and climate, whether that's through schemes or just because they're doing it anyway, because they either want to, because they like nature and the environment, or they recognise that it's actually a good thing to do for their farming business model and it's a good way to make their farm more resilient. So we're not in the business of trying to blame farmers for things. We're in the business of working with farmers to make this set of reforms work. There is a broad church of support around what we're trying to do here. So unlike, I've worked in and around government for quite a long time, and sometimes you work on programs where you're constantly pushing a rock up a hill. Nobody really wants it to work. It's very, very difficult to make it happen. That's not what this is like. There's a general kind of goodwill about it. We don't have anybody around government saying, oh, we don't really want this to happen, let's undermine it. We don't have people outside doing that either, but it's really hard to get it right. And that's why we're taking the test and learn approach. So if we don't see I think we will see, but part of this is going to be influenced by history, right? Because in general, you will tend to see a small take up at first, see how it goes, and then other people will follow, and then more will follow. That's a general kind of what happens when you launch new things. In the case of farming, we've messed this up before. And so it would be quite understandable if a large proportion of farmers are going to taking a kind of wait and see approach. So I'm not expecting to see mass uptake immediately of these schemes. And I don't think we should panic if we don't see mass uptake immediately, because I think just that factor alone, regardless of the design of the schemes, is going to mean people are going to feel a bit cautious. However, we're constantly engaging with farming groups and farmers directly to understand what's going to make the difference between you taking this up and not taking it up, what makes it relevant to you, what makes it attractive to you, what reduces the risk for you of coming into this scheme. And that's a combination of factors. One is the payment rates. Another is, are the actions actually practicable on my farm? Another is, what's the hassle involved in me getting involved in this? Do I have to pay someone £1,000 to fill the form in, or can I just do it myself? And we're trying to make it as simple as we can to remove that factor. Another is, what's the risk of me getting penalised if I either make a mistake or the weather intervenes to stop something happening in the way that I was expecting, or some other thing happens. And for that, we're making a much more supportive, less punitive regime of controls around the scheme. And I think we have to think about all those factors in the round. So it's not quite as simple as, if we don't see the take up, then we up the payment rates. But that is one of the things that we have to keep under review. And we have said we'll keep the payment rates under review, along with the design of the scheme and the things we're asking people to do, along with the range of standards, along with the rules around the scheme to make sure it's accessible to everybody, and also along with the control regime and the kind of forward roadmap. So it's quite a complicated set of considerations, but we are constantly looking for feedback to make sure we understand what particular things we need to change in order to get the right level of uptake.
And can I just ask, I'll sort of following on from that, Janet, is the payment rates themselves, how have you, what's the process that you've gone about to get to the payment rates? And perhaps you could just touch on the income foregone. I don't think anybody's fired that question, but it's one I often hear and get asked is, the old stewardship scheme, the EU schemes were all very much driven by income foregone. How has that influenced the payment rates, and how have you come up with the rates that you're starting off with?
So we've looked at a range of ways to set the payment rates. One of the things we tested in our tests and trials is should we pay for results rather than actions? And what we've concluded at this stage is that doing that, although it seems attractive on the face of it, is not fair because you don't have control over the results. So one farmer might get a particular set of results. Another farmer might not get the results having taken exactly the same actions in good faith because they had different, whether they've got different soil type, they're on different slope or whatever it is. So we're not doing payment by results in SFI at this stage. We are keeping that under review and we're still testing it. We have looked at how we calculate the price and we've adjusted the way we assess what the likely costs and income forgone are. And we've brought all those things up to date, and that's given us the prices that we've landed on now. We've also looked at what's the existing level of practice in the sector. So if we know that most farmers are already doing a certain amount of things, then we need to be paying people to go beyond that, not to do the things that they just already happen to be doing as basic farming good practice. And so we look at the difference between what's already happening and what do we actually want to see happening, and we pay for that. We're looking to pay for that change. And that's how we set the prices for now. But we have said really clearly, we're going to keep this all under review, both how we calculate them and also what level we set them at, and whether we need to, how do we need to kind of calibrate this, because we need to make this is a thing that we want people to choose to do. In order for them to choose to do it, it has to make business sense for them to do it. The other thing to say, though, is a lot of the things we're paying for are in a sweet spot where they're good for the environment and also good for the farm. So if you look after your soil better, you should see an impact on your productivity. And therefore, it's good, you get a private benefit as well as getting paid to do the action. And so a lot of the things we're paying for here, not all of them, but particularly the ones we've just introduced, you should see a return anyway if you do that. And that's why lots of farmers are already doing these practices. So it's complicated is the short answer, and we're keeping it under review, but that's how we've got to the point we're at right now.
Okay, thanks, Janet. And I guess kind of following on a little bit more, perhaps more on the detail, one of our members, Michael Summers, asks, comments that what you've told us tonight is not dissimilar to perhaps what you told us earlier in the year, and we perhaps we're looking for a few more specifics.
Yeah,
I'll maybe slightly answer that in that there are a few more specifics, details we know in detail, and we specifically didn't ask you to cover all of those off because we wanted some questions. Yeah. But it is a very valid point. And he goes on to say, could you kind of take us through, or have perhaps through the anticipated financial impact on a 450-acre mixed farm, for example, and have DEFRA done that kind of impact assessment around the move from BPS to SFI?
Absolutely, we have. We published something in 2019, or it might even be 2018, which was our assessment of what role does basic payments play in the income of different types of farms. So the first answer to your question is it really depends what sort of farm it is, where it is, what your business model is, how efficient you are. So where you are now in terms of profitability and what role BPS plays in that, there's a huge range. So depends where you are. If you're at the higher end of productivity and profitability, obviously you're going to be able to weather the changes in a more resilient way. If you're a 450-acre mixed farm, a rough calculation, you're probably getting about £40,000, aren't you, in basic payments. So and that's going to go down by 50% by 2024. Now, depending on what sort of farm you are, what you've got and where you are, etc., that will be some proportion of your profits by that stage. Over the period between now and then, you've got a number of choices about what to do to make up that lost income. And this is all about farmers making choices. But the range of choices you've got essentially boil down to three things. The first is increase your income in some way. And you might do that partly through coming into our schemes. And depending on how you want to do that, you might come into several of the sustainable farming incentive standards. So you might go into a soil standard, a hedgerow standard, and an integrated pest management standard and get paid for all three of those on your land. And you can choose what level of ambition you want to go into. So you might decide you're coming in at a kind of introductory level, you don't get as much money, or you want to really pull out all the stops and do more ambitious things and get more money. So that's one way to increase your income. And you can do that through a combination of SFI, and by 2024, we'll be rolling out local nature recovery as well. And in the meantime, by the way, you can also go into countryside stewardship if you want to, and that will continue being open to new entrants until 2024. And so you can continue coming into that if you don't want to wait for the new schemes to be ready, and we'll later provide a way for you to transfer across. So that's the first way to increase your income, but there are other things you can do too. And those more profitable farms do tend to have a more diverse range of income streams, not necessarily non-farming income streams, but they might be producing multiple different products from the same farm so that they're more resilient, or they might have diversified, or they might be making their goods more marketable or selling them in a different way to shorten the supply chain. And the productivity support that we're trying to introduce is designed in part to help with that. So that adding value round of that would help you to invest in things that will help you add value to your produce to increase your income. So that's the first set of things. The next set of things is reducing your costs. And some of our schemes will help with that. So if you enter into an integrated pest management standard, you get paid for that, but you will also reduce your reliance on pesticides. And if you go into our nutrient management standard, you'll reduce your need for inorganic fertilizers. So you'll get paid and you'll reduce your costs, and that's in that sweet spot. And also some of our productivity grants will help you with that too. So you can get more efficient, for example, by using precision technology. So you need less inputs. That's the second thing. And the third thing is to reduce waste. Reducing waste either through spoiled crops or through lack of productivity in your crops, or through wasted livestock produce through disease and pests. So things being rejected at the abattoir because of disease, for example. And the animal health and welfare pathway is designed to help you with that. So the short answer is it really depends on what choices you want to make for your farm, but you've got a range of choices within each of those categories: increasing your income, reducing your cost, reducing waste. I do recognise not all of the options I've just mentioned are relevant to all farms, and most farmers have already thought about these things and are already doing a lot of them. So I'm not in any way trying to make it sound like this is easy. I absolutely recognise it isn't. That's why we're doing it over 7 years. But it's up to you what the impact is and what choices you make. And there's things to help you within the range of stuff that we're doing, depending on what choices you want to make. I hope that helps. And there is more detail in the documents that we published this week. I just didn't think it was helpful to read it all out, but I've posted a couple of links in the chat to where you can find more detail about all of this.
Yeah, Janet, I think that does help. However, just a couple of points that these are perhaps rather than questions, just sort of comment really, is I suspect the economic circumstances have changed quite significantly since the report and the impact was done. And I wonder whether it does actually make sense for DEFRA to be, if you like, reviewing that and seeing how that does help. Yeah. And I think the second point would be that, and I can't speak for everybody, but I think a large number of us will already be in stewardship agreements of one sort or another. So the idea of going into a stewardship agreement while you kind of wait for SFI is a bit of a misnomer, because lots of people are already doing that. So the reduction in BPS, so what you're looking to replace with SFI is not only a reduction in BPS, but actually a reduction in your countryside stewardship, because that will be replaced with SFI. So I think it's really important that the schemes recognise that it's not just BPS that is being removed, if you like. Stewardship is being removed, and SFI appears to be trying to replace both. And I take your point about productivity grants. It's not just environmental payments, but there's quite a lot of money going into those schemes at the moment, and I'm sure lots of people are a little bit unclear. Maybe it's only back of a fag packet calculations at the moment as to exactly how they will replace that income.
Yeah, so just to be clear about what's replacing countryside stewardship, some of the things we currently fund through countryside stewardship in future will fund through SFI. Some of them will fund through local nature recovery. So it's not that there isn't a reduction in the money going into that scheme. It's just you'll get paid through the new scheme instead of the old one. So that we're spending more through countryside stewardship because we've got more people in it, but we're also reviewing the payment rates, and we'll publish the results of that review very shortly. And so that is still an attractive option, and that's not money that's going away. It's just that you'll be paid through a different means in future. We'll provide an easy way for you to transfer across from countryside stewardship to the new schemes, and it won't make any difference to you whether it's SFI or local nature recovery, because all you'll see is here's all the things you can do in your particular area. Pick which ones you want to form your agreement. So I think that's quite important to say. I do recognise though that if people are already in countryside stewardship, then telling them to go into it isn't very helpful because they're already there. But for those people, we've made it possible for you to be in both countryside stewardship and SFI at the same time. as long as we're not paying you for the exact same actions twice, and as long as the actions are compatible. So if you're in CS for hedgerows, you can come into SFI for soil, for example, and you can do that as we roll out the scheme incrementally between now and 2024. And we published a blog post the other day about how the SFI scheme will evolve. I'll just post a link to that because it might be a helpful thing for people to refer to, so you can see how it's going to, by 2024, there'll be a lot more in it than there is right now.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Janet. I am already going to apologise to probably most of you that we won't get around to all of your questions. They are flying in at the moment, and thanks to those of you that are now putting them in the Q&A rather than the chat. So that's really helpful. We will endeavour to, because we can keep a record of them on the Q&A, and we will endeavour to ask Janet, or at least her team, to come back on the ones that we don't ask. Well, I'm just going to move on, Janet, because you touched on, I guess, what people have been encouraged to do. And I think David Lord asks a really good question here. He says the scheme is going to appeal to those already on a regenerative / nature-friendly farming journey, but perhaps not so much to those still on conventional systems. The payment values are not big enough to incentivize change in what are uncertain times. And so will some farmers, is there a risk that farmers get left behind? He asks also, will local nature recovery pick up the pace on this? But I think that's a really valid question, is that you are encouraging certain types of farming, if I can put it in that term, which isn't necessary for everybody, or is that the intention? How do you kind of square that circle?
So the change we want to bring about is, we would like, some farmers already do this, we would like all farmers to think about their productivity in a broader sense than they do now. So not just what food can I produce, but also what environmental goods can I produce. And we want to make that be a thing that makes complete business sense, because if you can make money on the side from the environment alongside food production, why would you not do that? But depending on what sort of farm you've got and what sort of system you've got and what sort of approach you've got and what's your appetite for doing things differently, you might want to come into the more regenerative type actions that are in the soil standards. You might want to come in at the higher level of ambition of those standards if you're already doing that sort of system or wanting to move to it. If you're not quite sure, that's why we've got 3 levels of ambition in the sustainable farming incentive, because you can come in at a relatively low risk at the introductory level, dip your toe in the water, see how it goes, and then each year, if you want to, you can increase your level of ambition, you can put more land in. So if you're not already doing farming in that way and you want to give it a try, there's an easy on-ramp for you. You don't have to do an all or nothing decision. Or if you don't fancy doing that, you can come into local nature recovery, which will include a lot of the things that we currently pay for through CS and more, which are more to do with sparing areas of your land that are less productive. So you're not making a fat lot of profit anyway on that land, and it's a pain to farm because it's whatever, on a slope or very wet or whatever the particular issue is with that particular area. And you can give that over to habitat or wildlife or water storage or what have you, and it's your choice really. So what we're trying to do is create a range of options for farmers, so that depending on what type of farming system you have and what you want to do, there's something in it for you, whether it's sparing a bit of land here and there for nature, or whether it's taking a more regenerative approach. And we're not trying to sell one or other of those things, but we do think the future is that farmers look at productivity in that broader sense that I just described, and they're all thinking, what can I produce for the environment and get paid to do there, alongside what food can I produce?
Okay, I mean, I think that touches a really key point, is the I don't know whether it is a dilemma, or that's probably the wrong word, dichotomy, I never know what that means, but a balance between food production and the environment. And yeah. I suspect a lot of us feel that the direction of travel on the new schemes is very much environmentally slanted and not so much food production. And I was interested to hear and read some of the Secretary of State's speech last week, which appeared to me to be quite focused on perhaps there being a bit of a split between I think he calls it sustainable intensification, does he? And perhaps the more environmental areas. And you know, is there a risk that we end up with, you know, productive farming and environmental farming? And so perhaps you could just park that for a minute, and then also a question raised from a member in Devon, which is, I think, around the same subject, and brings Natural England into it. And perhaps you could give us a bit of a feel for where Natural England fit. But they ask, are Natural England are technical advisors with environmental schemes. They are there for nature and have little knowledge of farming or understanding of, this is an upland question in particular, of upland stock. A Natural England answer to any environmental issue is just to remove stock. So in other words, sort of taking food production away just for environmental benefit. And there is no balance and there are unintended consequences. They suggest that maybe the name Sustainable Farming Initiative should change. I think that might be slightly tongue-in-cheek, but I think the point is really valid. And I wonder if you could just expand on where DEFRA are on this and how you really see the food production element of ELMS and SFI and so on, and against the environmental one, because I suspect a lot of people feel this is a big on environment and not so much on food production.
Yeah, I've posted a link. It's a really good question, and I get asked about this a lot. I've posted a link to the Secretary of State's speech in the chat, just in case there are people who didn't see it or get a chance to read it. And in that speech, he was setting out that this is all about food production and also environmental outcomes. And that is what my marching orders are. When you think about the kind of diversity of farming, which is one of the things that makes it such a fascinating and exciting sector, you do have extremes and you have a whole range within that. So there are people who are taking a much more like heavily environmental approach and actually reducing their food production. They're very few and far between. And there are some that are taking a very, very intensive approach, not at all interested in producing environmental goods. Most farms are somewhere on the scale between those two. And we're not trying to say where we think that all farms should be at a particular point on that scale. We're trying to say we recognize that diversity. We'd like there to be something for everyone on that scale in our schemes. For the vast majority of farmers, it's going to be about continuing food production in the way that they do it now, but also producing environmental goods alongside that. Just for example, if you use precision technology to apply your fertilizer, you will use less fertilizer. That's good for your profitability. It's good for your crops, good for your soil. It's also good for carbon because you're using less carbon in terms of what's been used to produce the fertilizer. So that's win-win-win for productivity, for the environment, and for the climate. That's the sort of thing which we think any farmer, it would make business sense for them to adopt. And the vast majority are going to be in that middle ground, looking at things like that, which produce for both. And it just so happens that lots of things that make you more efficient are also really good for carbon reduction, and in some cases also good for biodiversity. So if you use less pesticides because you're doing an integrated pest management approach, cost you less money, less pesticides into the environment, more biodiversity, it's win-win-win. And so there's a lot that, but we're not trying to say, everybody, you should farm like this. We're trying to say, here's a range of choices that you can make and you decide what you want to do depending on where you are, what your farming system is, what your preferences are.
Okay, I think it's probably something that needs, if that is the intention, and I've no doubt it is, but I think that probably needs emphasising more and more and more as you go into this, because you are asking practical farmers who's, I suspect, and I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think I can speak for probably most people on the call here, we are about producing food. That's not to say we're not interested in the environment, but we are about producing food in a sustainable manner. And getting that point over, that is a key part of the new schemes, I think is perhaps one that's not as clear as it might be at the moment. And I suppose a little bit of a point on that, although this may go the other way, is obviously there's a question that's been posed from a member in Northamptonshire around the Environment Agency's stance on autumn applications of organic manure and how that fits with SFI and ELMS and the push that DEFRA seem to want to put in terms of improving soil matters. They seem to be diametrically opposed a little bit, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't want, obviously, I know, I can see why people have got that impression, and I'm aware of the kind of debate that there's been around farming rules for water and the concern that there's been around that. In my team, we're looking at what should the future regulatory approach look like for nutrient management. And we're all aligned across the whole DEFRA group, including EA, that what we would like is for manure to be treated as a resource, not a waste product. But we would like that to be done in a way that doesn't result in nutrients being discharged into rivers because of the method of the application or the timing of the application. And I think that's reasonable as a position to take, and it's possible to have a regulatory regime and an incentive regime that supports that. Do we have that now? Don't think so. And we've got further work to do to make sure that we line those two things up. What we've said in the SFI standards is that where there's a requirement to apply organic matter, there's a range of ways that you can do that, not just through manure application, but chopped straw is allowed, green cover is allowed, other methods are allowed. So we've encouraged farmers to choose the method that's right for them. And if you are applying manure, obviously you need to do that within the law as it exists right now. But in terms of the regulatory regime going forward, we are looking at how do we make sure we've got the right rules and they're being applied in the right way so that we can support the outcomes we want to see, which is manure being treated as a resource, not a waste material, in a way that does not damage the environment in the course of doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that there's a joined up approach to all of that. And I know we're trying to work on that. Yeah. Just sort of slightly, perhaps moving on a little bit to cover and I'll fire a few questions, just sort of
one a quick fire round.
One after the other in a minute. Yeah, I'm not sure they're short answers. But this really is more around access and in specifically tenants' access to programs. Both, Lynette mentioned earlier that the introduction of SFI 2022 and the idea of if you've got short-term tenants, still being able to access, even though it's a 3-year scheme, is welcomed. I think we have perhaps the same concerns going forward on local nature recovery and landscape recovery in particular. And we've got a couple of questions. Ian Spinks asked that, or suggests that results around the whole of Elms really are more likely to be better if both landowner and tenant work together. Yeah. And are you thinking of doing anything to encourage landlord-tenant cooperation? This is something that when myself and George met with Victoria Prentice recently, we were kind of assured, and yourself, we were sort of assured that was something that was very much on the radar, and we are really supportive of that. So I wonder whether you've got anything in mind to do that. And then just following on from that, Helen Radmore asked, will we be able to enter part of our farm? Slightly, this is not necessarily access, but she says, I've got many landlords and will not be able to get all eligible at the same time. Yeah. Partly due to the short length of the tenancies they've got. And there's another question, which I can't quite put my hand on at the moment, around how you see FBT tenants with relatively short tenancies being able to access these schemes going forward, particularly as they don't have the same protections that AHA tenants have about landlords' consent and so on. So there's a whole range of questions there, Janet. Yeah. But if you picked up on the general gist.
Happy to work through those. So on Helen's question, can you enter part of the farm? Yes, you can. And not only that, but you can then add more bits in over time if you want to. So if you've got a bit of the farm that you can enter into in this year, you can add more parcels in future years as they become available to you to add in. And that's part of the flexibility we've added to make the scheme work for tenants and for all farmers, actually, because we know that the way farmers tend to adopt some of the practices we're paying for is not, let me just turn my whole system over to this new approach overnight, but actually let me try it here and then I'll see if I want to scale it, which seems entirely sensible to me. So yes, you can enter part of your farm. There's no minimum amount of your farm to enter. You can enter as small amount as you like. In terms of local nature recovery, we're working now on the scheme rules for that. Some of what we've learned about how to develop the rules for a sustainable farming incentive, we're just going to lift and apply to local nature recovery. But it is a bit of a different scheme in that some of the options there will be longer term, some of them will be shorter term. And so we need to work through together, how does this work and how's it particularly going to be accessible to tenants? We'd love to see, landlords and tenants working together. This is a tricky one because obviously we're not going to get involved in individual landlord-tenant relationships. I think our job is to create schemes which provide the right environment for that cooperation to happen, where both parties want it to happen, and make it more likely that it will, and make it really easy for you to do that. And there are examples now of really good landlord-tenant cooperation around scheme agreements, where the landlord takes responsibility for some of it and the tenant takes responsibility for the other, and we want to support those types of arrangements. So I think that comes down mainly to flexibility and allowing allowing space for that wide range of approaches. But I'm looking forward to working through the detail of that, particularly around local nature recovery, to make sure we're actually really encouraging that, not just hoping it might happen. But it is tricky because, like I say, we don't want to get involved in individual relationships. In terms of FBTs, I'm reliably informed, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong, that the average length of an FBT remaining is just over 3 years. And that's one of the reasons why we chose 3 years as the scheme agreement length. But we know some people have got less time than that left. So for sustainable farming incentive, and this was a tenant farmer's suggestion actually, that we should allow as a transitional measure, we should allow people with less time than that, 2 years, to come into the scheme as well. So that it's not, if you don't have 3 years left, you're not excluded. We'd like to allow shorter agreements than that too. The tricky bit there is, some of the actions that we're paying for, you only really get results if you do it over a period of time longer than a year. So what we need to do is look at all the different types of things we're going to pay for and see, can we support people who are on licenses to come in? Can we support even shorter remaining tenancies to come in? And that is something that we're actively thinking about, because we do want to make the scheme as accessible as we can to everybody, and also be able to demonstrate we're getting outcomes from it. Because if we can't do that, the money won't continue. It's very important that we can demonstrate there's value coming out of this money, so that it can be justified as a thing to carry on in the future. I think that's all those questions. Is that fair? Have I missed anything there?
No, I think you've done well there, Janet, to be fair. I mean, I guess just to go back on the landlord-tenant relationship, I think we made the point when we met with the minister that a sort of, if you like, landlords being on notice that if they're unreasonably not allowing access, or they're taking land away from tenants, there should be a risk, that the risk to them that isn't, if you like, this is very layman's terms, but it's not playing ball with the intention of the new schemes, and that the activity of some of the agents is not being particularly helpful in this regard. And again, they should perhaps be on notice that may happen. And also, if there's a way of the Treasury being able to look again at the taxation position, which I think, again, we discussed, might be helpful to allow longer term tenancies, which then clearly gets away from the average tenancy being 3 years, and therefore it being a problem to deliver these schemes. And it does appear to us that you have got a real opportunity with what you're trying to do with these schemes, by the very nature that they're longer term, that there should be much more legislative encouragement to let longer. Whereas with BPS being an annual scheme, that wasn't the situation. I'm really conscious of time, Janet, and I apologise to people that we haven't got around to all those questions, but I'm going to hijack this with one question, because I had a call from a member of our East Midlands Committee, Christopher Renner, today to ask that I definitely ask this question. So, at fear of my life, I'm going to ask this. It doesn't fit in with anything that we're just currently talking about, but it does fit in with the kind of thing you're trying to encourage people to do. The question really is that glyphosate is a key component of systems that use minimum till and direct drilling as a method, and therefore regenerative agriculture largely as well. Clearly, historically, there's been an issue around, or there is an issue around, how long we will be able to use glyphosate. What is DEFRA, or what is your position on that in terms of, if you like, pushing people in that direction, but then potentially taking one of the key tools away?
So I don't lead on policy. Christopher's actually written to me about this as well, and I've got the team looking into it, because I don't lead on policy on what we ban and what we don't ban. So far as I'm aware, we don't have any plans to ban glyphosate. But I have, in response to Christopher's email, I've replied saying I've asked the relevant policy team to tell me, and I will reply to him and let him know, and we can include that in the answers that we circulate here too. Okay,
thank you, Janet. And I guess I'm gonna conclude with a final question here from James Hadwin, who says a DEFRA document stated that they expected farm rents to halve when direct payments are removed. Do DEFRA still expect this to be the case?
We do think rents will go down. There's a question as to over what period of time will that happen, how much of it will happen, what will be the kind of profile of reduction. But we do think that they will, and part of the reason we think that is because that's not just us and our economic analysis, but it's also us talking to agents and experts in the field who also think that is what will happen over time. But there is a question as to how that happens, when it happens, in what order does it happen, etc. And that's something that time will tell. And it's important to say that this is a very complex system that we're intervening in, and we're taking away something that's been there for decades. And so a lot of what we can do, a lot of what we need to do is be monitoring very closely these sorts of questions over time. And that's why we're taking this test and learn approach, so we can see what's really happening in real life, because I can try and predict things. But ask any economist, ask a group of economists what's going to happen, and you'll get 6 different answers from 6 different economists. You've got to actually monitor what's happening and respond to it over time. And that's why we're taking that test and learn approach. So we're keeping a close eye on that.
Yeah, and I think that's good to know that you will, Janet, because I think this is quite important, particularly when you look at landscape recovery and possibly even local nature recovery, because if one of the unintended consequences of something like rewilding, for example, is if the payment rates are so much more attractive than the rental levels, if rental levels are going to halve, then you may end up with a consequence of removing tenanted land from the sector, which you really don't want to do. No. And you're ending up with environmental scheme or certain types of environmental scheme on land which it's really not appropriate to have it, but just simply because the economics for the landlord and the simplicity potentially for the landlord is being encouraged by the scheme. So I think it's really important that whole kind of area is really monitored. And I guess one of the benefits of the direction that we're heading in is that there is flexibility to pretty rapidly change schemes, change payment rates if the intended consequence, which we haven't had before in the EU schemes. And I guess we'd encourage you to use those. Oh,
definitely. And that's the whole point, is that we have that flexibility and control of what we're doing, so that we can make those adjustments as we go. Exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. Well, we are just about to hit 8 o'clock, and I'm always conscious that we can stay on Zoom for a limited amount of time. I think an hour is about the length of time that we can all stay on Zoom. And we really have covered, I don't know, I'm not very good with my percentages looking at screens, but I suspect we've covered less than half the questions that have been thrown in, but I think we have covered a huge amount of ground. And thank you very much, Janet, for giving up your time to come and speak to us. We really do value these sessions, and I've no doubt if you're interested and keen to come back, you will be asked to come back. And I would also encourage all of our members to keep an eye out, if you're technically proficient enough, to read the blog that comes out from DEFRA. It does have some useful information on it. There's lots of links about the last week, and again, it's really worthwhile to set some time aside to read those. And as Lynette said earlier, and absolutely agree with, we are in a moment, a time of change. This process is going to last for quite a long time, I suspect, and there's a lot of complexity in it. But it's really important that we as farm businesses do what we can, I think, to engage where we can, where we feel it's appropriate, and not kind of dismiss it as being all a bit complex and difficult to do. And some things may well be too complex and too difficult to do, in which case absolutely dismiss them, and hopefully DEFRA will pick up on that particular policy or that particular scheme doesn't work very well. But if we don't at least engage in it to a level, and I know Janet and her team are pretty good at trying to engage with us and answer our questions. So I think, Janet, you put your email in earlier, which may have been a mistake, but
I always welcome contact. I do read all my emails and reply to them. I don't always do it on the same
Janet's
day.
Email, thanks very much, Janet, for that. So I'll wind up a bit. So thank you very much to Janet for coming. Lynette, thanks very much for attending and giving a TFA spin on things as well, as always, really valued. And just to remind everybody, this series of seminars continues again in January, Wednesday the 26th, around common standards with DEFRA and Julia Aglenby, who's the Executive Director of the Foundation for Common Land. I'm definitely going to attend that, but I know about as much as a small postage stamp about common. So we'll need lots of questions about that if I'm going to intelligently ask them on that. So, but I know that's a really big area of debate and complexity as well. We also have one February the 16th and March the 23rd, 16th on nature-based farming with Caroline Drummond from Leaf, and the 23rd of March on the lump sum exit scheme with Claire Williams, who's the team leader on that as part of Janet's team. So put those dates diary and try and attend if you can. And I just thank you all very much for attending. We will endeavour to get your questions answered. And all I can do now is wish you all a very happy Christmas. I think there was an announcement about Plan B. I didn't really follow it myself, so I don't know what Plan B is, but hopefully it's not going to affect my Christmas too much. Yeah, so everybody have a good Christmas and a happy New Year. Obviously, there's lots of Christmas reading to do on the DEFRA blog. If your really family is irritating you, that is where to go on Christmas Day.
What more fun could it be possible to have at Christmas?
Absolutely.
Read our blog.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for having me along this evening.
No problem, Janet. Thanks very much.